April the 16th, 2026. There is a peculiar dignity to a man who rises at 5 in the morning in a tin shack, particularly when that man is me, and particularly when the shack itself offers no encouragement whatsoever for such behaviour. The roof ticks and settles like an old bureaucrat clearing his throat. The walls hum faintly with the promise of heat yet to come, and the kettle, an instrument of both hope and mild betrayal, it takes far too long for it to produce anything resembling coffee. Still, here I am, upright and vaguely triumphant, having achieved the improbable feat of waking early for the third consecutive day. This, I feel, places me in the upper echelons of human development, somewhere between a monk and a particularly well-organised postman. Outside, the roosters are conducting what can be described as a violent symposium on the nature of morning. Their cries arrive not as gentle reminders, but as declarations of war. The dogs, meanwhile, have taken it upon themselves to provide percussion. In my ear, though not in any physical sense, for I've removed contraptions once tethered me to distraction, there is the faint murmur of an online meeting. The voices drift in and out like ghosts who have forgotten why they are haunting. Each speaker seems to be engaged in a solemn competition to determine who can sound the most exhausted by existence.
So the thing about step one is it's a great step, says Joe K. I particularly like page 63 of the basic text, says Ben D.
There is a sameness to it that is almost impressive. One could replace each voice with a recording of a man sighing into a pillow and achieve much the same effect. I find myself judging them, which is, of course, a deeply spiritual activity provided one not acknowledges it quickly enough. And so I do. It occurs to me, like a man remembering he has left the stove on, that I must sound exactly like this to them, perhaps worse. Perhaps I am, to some unfortunate listener, the very embodiment of dreariness, a kind of human drizzle. This thought is sobering. I pause mid-sip and attempt a brief experiment in gratitude. I am grateful, I tell myself. I'm grateful for connection, for the strange miracle of voices travelling through wires to reach a man in a shack at dawn, for the fact that, dreary or not, I am not entirely alone. This lasts approximately 6 seconds. I finish the coffee, dress with minimal ceremony, and step out into the day, which has by now fully decided to exist. The road to 888 Shopping Mall is a procession of ordinary miracles. Tricycles rattling like philosophical arguments, pedestrians navigating existence with quiet expertise, and the occasional man pushing a cart, whose purpose is known only to himself and possibly to God. The mall greets me with its usual enthusiasm, which is to say it is already awake and slightly suspicious of my intentions. I make my way to the coffee shop, where the expat crew gathers, a congregation of men who have, through a series of decisions both sound and questionable, arrived at this exact point in space and time. They are, for the most part, elderly. Not uniformly so, there are gradations, but collectively they give the impression of a museum exhibit titled Men Who've Seen a Lot of Things. They sit around the table with the solemnity of diplomats, cups of coffee arranged before them like minor treaties. Nearby, though not too nearby, for there is an unspoken geometry to these arrangements, sit their 20-something-year-old companions, young women, radiant, entirely out of proportion to the men they accompany, like bright flowers growing beside ancient tombs. They laugh among themselves, their conversation light and quick, while the men speak in slower, heavier tones. It is a peculiar situation, and one that requires a certain flexibility of the mind to accept. I remind myself, with some effort, that this is normal here in the Philippines. That what might be scandalous in one place is merely Tuesday in another. That perhaps beneath the obvious transactions, there exists some quieter exchange, something resembling companionship, or at least mutual tolerance. I sit, I drink, I listen. At one point I mentioned casually, as though discussing the weather, that I am 40 days removed from certain proclivities, that I am in fact quite pleased with myself. There was a previous attempt I had which reached 70 days before collapsing like a poorly constructed argument. The man across from me regards me as though I have just confessed to collecting teaspoons. Right, he says, and immediately begins discussing politics. Trump enters the conversation with the inevitability of a recurring illness. We speak of him as one might speak of a storm, something vast, uncontrollable, and oddly fascinating. It is, apparently, easier to discuss global upheaval than personal restraint. After a time, I excuse myself. There is something in the air, a sudden encouragement perhaps, that suggests I'm not entirely safe here. Not in any physical sense, but in that quieter, more dangerous way. I step back into the street. My thought processing begins at once. Go on, says a voice that is unmistakably mine and entirely untrustworthy. You know what you want to do now. I don't do that anymore, I reply aloud or otherwise. Those hotel rooms are haunted. Don't be ridiculous. Sure, you're standing here, you got the money. The world has provided. Yeah, but that doesn't mean I have to accept. I have 40 days today. It's inevitable, the voice says. You might as well skip the pretending. I'm not pretending. Ah, you are now. Come on, you're just delaying. And then, as if guided by some invisible concierge, I find myself standing outside a different place. It's not a hotel. The sign is cheerful in a way that feels inappropriate. Happy ending massage, it declares, as though announcing a children's party. The windows are tinted, offering privacy or perhaps plausible deniability. A small sign promises 24-hour service, which suggests either a remarkable dedication or a complete disregard for the concept of rest. Around me, the street continues its indifferent performance. Beggars sit along the footpath, their presence both ordinary and quietly devastating. One man pushes a cart laden with objects whose value is known only to him, and traffic moves with the steady rhythm of necessity. Life, in other words, goes on. There you are now, says the same voice. This is absurd, I say. You know it is. Ah, yeah, do I know? Yes, we talked about this at the step work meeting, remember? Human instincts are out of balance. There is a pause. You're quoting basic text now. No, look, I'm reminding you. Yeah, of what? That this isn't what we do anymore. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, and what is it that we do instead? I hesitate. I turn my motorbike towards SM Shopping Mall and I enter, fully booked. We read books, I say, weakly. Now, it is perhaps not the most convincing argument ever made, but it is enough. The moment passes, not dramatically, there is no thunder, no applause, but quietly, like a man deciding not to cross the street. Later in the coffee shop, I sit with a book titled The Practice of Not Thinking. This strikes me as deeply ironic given the volume of thought that has occurred to me in the preceding hours. Still, I open it. The first chapter speaks of listening. My phone rings. It is my sponsor. He immediately informs me that he has been sacked again. There is apparently a conspiracy of bullies operating out across multiple industries, all of whom have taken a personal interest in his employment. I listen. After a while I ask, as gentle as possible, how many such bullies have you encountered in the workplace? There is a pause. You're nothing but a loser, he says. I immediately hang up the phone. And in the silence that follows, I experience something rare and valuable, the quiet satisfaction of not having made bad decisions today, which, all things considered, is not a bad way to begin the day.